Never be the one that says no to yourself. Let other people say no to you. If you want to create something, don't be the one that steps in your own way. Do it, and then you'd be surprised how many people are okay with it and they like it. And if they're not, they're not.
Welcome everybody to episode 30 of the Paul and Pals podcast. I'm your host, Ponyboy Paul. And Paul and Pals is a podcast where I interview my creative pals who are creating the life that they want to live. And my goal is to actually inspire you, but really myself, to get up and actually start creating the life that you want to live. And on this episode, I have a creative conversation with my pal, Nikita Redkar. She's a stand-up comedian, actress, and screenwriter who's currently studying for her master's at the Met Film School in London. And being that she actually did this interview from London, this is my first international pal. And so basically, Paul and Pals is pretty much global right now. So I don't really know what that means. But on this episode, we talk about how being international and growing up in multiple places like Austin, Singapore, and Germany, and the impact or non-impact it's had on her growing up. And how, while growing up, she considered herself a very shy person, but she discusses the moment that gave her the confidence to actually start doing stand-up. And stand-up has brought her a lot of thrills. It's actually very almost addicting, if you will, but it's also brought her a lot of failures, dealing with depression and at times even suicidal ideation. But she discusses how all of this has helped her realize that she shouldn't base all of her self-worth on the validation that she receives in comedy. Also, if you're interested in to know what I really took away from this conversation, you can actually subscribe to the Paul and Pals newsletter, link in show notes, to look at my response to this interview. But without any further ado, let's get creative. But no, I'm really glad we're able to get this. I know it's been a little bit in the making because at first, I'd actually seen you a couple times because Aparna, our mutual friend that connected us, she's posted you a couple times, and I think she's even shared maybe footage or pictures at one of your, stand-ups.
Yeah.
And one day I just saw you.
Shout out.
Very supportive. In fact, she actually told me that I have to refer to her as your talent scout. So first of all, shout out to Aparna.
Shout out
for linking us up. She is your talent scout. You have to give her some commission.
No.
But I was gonna say that I I saw her on. I think she posted you. You were in New York, and I saw her post you, and then like a really quick funny clip, And I went to your page. I checked you out, and then I saw some of your TikTok, and it was really funny. So I'm like, you know what? I feel like she'll be really good. No problem.
Thank you.
And so I just wanted to reach out and just kind of know more about you, see what you're doing now, and I feel like just really share your story.
Cool.
And the first thing I do want to congratulate you on, you're actually the first international guest I've ever had. So basically, yeah. So basically, we're global now. We're global, and
that's why our times were crazy to me because you sent me that email and you were like 12 a.m., 1 a.m., 2 a.m., pick a time that suits you. And I'm like, what is wrong with this guy? Does he not have any other free time? And like the ass crack of morning.
I felt so bad.
Sorry, can I swear?
No, you can.
Okay.
I felt so bad because it wasn't until you told me that I'm like, oh snap! I didn't even think about the time zone difference and what I had put available. I'm like, oh shit, you're like 12 a.m. No, but it worked out. I'm glad. And speaking about international, I know you've been kind of all over the world, like Austin, Singapore, Germany, China, and now you're living in London. And I don't know if I missed any, but kind of like just to start off, which of those places do you feel like really made the most impact on you, kind of growing up?
All of them and none of them, which may not be the answer you want to hear, but it's like hard to pick one spot because all of them were involved in like a formative time of my life. So like I grew up in Singapore. I was there like age 6 to 16. And then I came back to Texas. And then I was in Germany for like a bit of my early 20s. Actually, I would say the least impactful was probably China because I was a baby and I don't remember it. So the rest of them, they influenced me in their own ways. And yeah, it's a hard question to pick like a favorite spot because they were all
No.
amazing and chaotic at the same time.
No, I think that answer is a little bit more insightful because what I take from that is like, they all had their own influence on you. But,
Mm-hmm.
kind of like when we're growing up, you mentioned formative years.
Yeah.
Were you having to deal with a lot of like, who am I? Like, what represents me? A lot of probably friend turnover?
See, yes, there was a lot of friend turnover because all of my friends were international school friends because I went to an international school. And basically, everyone's parents was there on an expat assignment. So their companies sent them to Singapore for 2 or 3 years. And then after your assignment is done, come back to your home country. So just as I would start to get really close to someone, they would move. So that kind of made me a bit of a commitment phobe. At least I have a
Yeah.
reason. But
Yeah.
yeah, so there was definitely a lot of that kind of going on. And then what was the first part of your question?
I was going to say, like, it felt like to me, did you ever have to
Friends
struggle
turnover,
with
something else.
who am I or what represents me?
Oh, yeah, definitely. And I think that a lot of people, whether they have spent their whole life in a place or not, especially like children of immigrants, have that identity crisis
Mm-hmm.
of, being American versus being from their parents' land. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that you are taught to do as growing up, and a lot of stuff you feel like you're supposed to do. And a lot of individuality that you're discovering along the way. So that striking that balance is like really tricky.
Yeah. No, I definitely relate to that because I came to America when I was like 5 from Nigeria. And
Ooh.
one thing I used to struggle with because so my ethnic tribe is Yoruba, so there's a language, there's a whole community of it, right? And I know when I came to America, I wanted to fit in so bad and like
Mm-hmm.
understand the lingo and how to use English correctly and different slang. And then sometimes my parents would be like, we want you to speak this language at home, or like, I was kind of going back and forth. So it sometimes it is kind of hard as an immigrant to figure out like, oh, how do I fit in, but also still keep that culture.
Mm-hmm.
And you're Indian. Do you feel like you grew up in a traditional Indian household where it was very cultural, or did your parents also have to adjust with the locations that you guys were growing up in as well?
Yeah, it definitely wasn't traditional. If anything, we were the family that was being judged by the traditional Indian families for being too crazy and too chaotic with our lives and too unpredictable because we were moving around so much. And my parents also have faced that adjustment too, like when it comes to friends and just taxes in different countries and culture and like learning the language and all that stuff. So they've also had their fair share of identity crises along with me.
I
Yeah.
see. And I noticed that you and your mom, you guys did a podcast together. And first of
We
all, I gotta say that
did.
podcast idea of bringing parents on is actually really cool to kind of see,
Yeah,
where you get it from your parents, right? And for
true.
you, what do you think that you really get from your mom?
Whew. This is so funny because we played a game the other day, me, my parents, and my sister. And me and my sister had a lot of stuff in common. And my sister and my dad had a lot of stuff in common. But when we were thinking about our mom, we were like, holy shit, like we have a lot of the stuff we have in common is like the less goofy and quirky stuff. Like my sister and my dad are
Mm,
both like sticklers for schedule. They're the type that if you have a flight at 4 in the morning, you want to be woken up by them because they're
yeah.
so aggressive about schedule. But my mom and I, a lot of our similarities are like emotional. Like both of us are people who need to, for example, if something is bothering us, we need to complain about it. Like we're not fixers, we're first complainers and then we're going to fix it. So that really pisses off my dad
Mhm.
because he's like very solution oriented. So he's like, okay, so this is
Yeah.
how you're going to solve that problem. And I'm like, I don't want to solve that problem. I want to whine about it and bitch about it. Not now. Maybe tomorrow I'll
Yeah.
solve it. But me and my mom
Got
are
you.
really similar that way.
No, I can see her vibe because it's funny you say that because I felt she was just very quirky. I was listening to her.
Yeah,
I'm like, oh, I wonder
yeah,
what she
yeah.
thinks about this as y'all were
Oh
getting the
my
questions
gosh.
answered.
Yeah, actually our personalities are very similar in the way that we love to be social, we love to like host parties and just,
Hmm.
be the belle of the ball.
Gotcha. So when you were kind of getting into your career, because I know, right now you comedian, actress, screenwriter, but I guess at the beginning when you were first kind of committing to any of that, was there like oh, I knew that's what I wanted to do? Or did you kind of go the natural, like, let me go find a degree or major, and then that just came as an option? What initially pushed you in that route?
Well, when I was 18, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I just knew I wanted money. So I got into
Hey.
finance. And then 2 years into finance, I was like, wow, I am incredibly bad at math. Why did I do this? But then I still wanted money. So I was like, okay, who makes the most money? Wall Street. Let's try to get into investment banking. So I took a couple of investment banking classes and ended up going on this like networking retreat to Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan and like all those hot shot Wall Street companies. And I got there in New York and just, after meeting with them, I was just like, this is the worst. I don't connect with any
Yeah.
of this. I don't like the culture. I'm bad at math. I'm worse at math than I realized after coming here and realizing what the qualifications are. And I was just in this like pit of despair in New York and wandering around the streets just like literally so sad. And I didn't connect with anyone from my group because they were all loving it. They were like, yeah, this is my future. So I actually ended up meeting a friend in New York, and he's a comedian, and that's how I got introduced to comedy because I went to some comedy shows with him, and I was like, oh, there are more fun ways to live.
Mm-hmm. And then was it kind of like you went to that show and you're like, oh yeah, I can do this? Or was it kind of like, oh, that's fun? What was that push that was like, oh yeah, this is me?
Well, I went to an open mic, which is a place where comedians try out their new material while I was in New York. And I went there as an audience member, and people were so bad that I was like, oh, if they're doing it, then I can do it. I just like really went in from it from an egotistical perspective. But then looking back at
Yeah.
it now, open mics are where you try out your new stuff. So of course they were bad. It wasn't practiced.
And I sometimes think that I'm funny. I don't think I'm comedian stand-up funny because that's a whole different skill level. But like kind of growing up, were you always kind of like the class clown, or like you always could make a joke out of anything?
Not at all. Growing up, I was very shy, like clinically shy. Like I didn't have any friends. I barely talked. Like my parents would literally be like, "Does this girl talk? Like, does she have an issue? She doesn't say anything." But then I was always witty in my humor. Like I would write songs by myself and like change around the lyrics. I was obsessed with Weird Al when I was a kid. So I basically wrote like an
Same. Yeah.
album of songs that, were just funnier lyrics. And me and my sister also have like a really goofy sense of humor. So like the jokes I would crack with her and on her were really good. So like I knew I had it. I've never been the more spontaneous type of funny. I've always been the more like calculated, witty funny.
That's interesting because I would expect that you're kind of like you just always were. I don't know, not comedy per se, but just always that wittiness, comedic person in the room. So how do
Well,
you
now,
overcome your stage fright then? Okay, yeah, now, but how do you overcome your stage fright? Because that's a lot of that's a lot of pressure.
yeah. Well, when I was a kid, I was really, like I said, really shy, and I had no friends, and I always wanted friends, and my goal in life was to be popular. So I just really studied the popular kids, like, what were they doing? They're funny, they're pretty, they're sociable, they're outgoing, and just like really study that behavior for a few years. And then by the time I got to high school, I started getting a lot of friends and boyfriends and like kind of a status, and that was all like,
Yeah.
I don't want to say manufactured, but it was something that I worked towards. So I was never the type of
Mm-hmm.
person that was like, oh, I don't have that personality trait. This is not for me. Because I literally got over my
Mm,
shyness by just working at it.
got you. I relate a lot to that because I think growing up I too wanted to fit in. And I
Yeah.
think one thing about wanting to fit in is that you actually put a lot of effort into understanding how things work and how people
And
work
how
and what
others
people
work.
like.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
that ties into comedy.
exactly. Exactly, right? Because you're kind of
Hmm.
like it might not even be intentional. You might say something and then somebody laughs or somebody smiles. You're like, oh, y'all like that,
Yeah,
huh?
you caught
And then
that.
you
You're
start
like,
like,
that's the memory.
exactly.
Lock it in.
Right? It's like a trigger. You're like, oh yeah, I'm gonna give him some of that. And I
Hmm.
don't know. I think that's kind of helped me develop my personality because sometimes when you might not have, because initially, let's say, you're a very handsome person or you're a very just, physically attractive, you might not have to do as much effort because people might just naturally gravitate to you,
Yeah.
right? But there's something about understanding what people like that you start to develop that personality about you.
Hmm.
So when you started figuring this out and like kind of like, oh, let me do comedy for sure. What did you realize was like your type of comedy? Like, did you already have an idea what your audience would be?
That is still something that I'm figuring out. And I think the first few years in comedy, you do have to definitely learn to be able to play to all crowds. But that doesn't necessarily mean make all types of jokes. So nobody's really expecting you to go make a joke about having kids and a joke about doing drugs until 5 a.m. and a joke about airplanes or whatever. Like, people expect or they want to see like a linear pattern, but there's something universal in everyone. Doesn't matter if you're someone who works in finance or like an architect or a coal miner in Iceland. Like, if you can make people laugh by being yourself, you just kind of have to figure out like what the universal parts of your experiences are.
And you mentioned early years of comedy. Tell us about your early years and what's like one of your most memorable, I don't know, bombs or just that moment that you're like, wow, I did it. Like, tell us about that.
Well, my first open mic set was kind of a train wreck because I stole half of my jokes from John Mulaney, which was so cringe looking back at it. But I did one joke about the new Jurassic World movie had come out right around then. And I don't remember the exact detail of the joke, but I had done a joke about the movie and that killed. And I was just like, oh, wait, I can do this. And then like literally that's where the addiction started. And then
Yeah.
like the next consecutive, probably like 80, 100 open mics, I just bombed straight after. But I was like, oh,
Wait.
but wait, I know it. I got this the first time. Like, I know it's there somewhere.
Whoa, hold on. You said 80 to okay, by the way, what year or time period is this?
This is closer to the end of 2015 / early 2016.
Got you. And how did you deal with that failure that many times that you still wanted to keep at it?
Well, because the good parts are so good. It's like going to a party and you remember the
Like,
best party of your life, and then like the next parties after that are just boring and they have the worst music and the people suck, but you still keep going back when you get invited to a party. It's kind of like that.
that's a great analogy. That's a great analogy. I remember like when me and my friends first kind of like left, because we used to, go out a lot in college. And I
Yeah.
remember just some of the first parties that we would link up and go post college. We're kind of like, kind of like you're in the party, you got your drink, you with your boys, but like you just standing around, like you're like, yo,
Yeah.
y'all trying to dip, like nothing's happening. So that's really cool because I think kind of I know you're gonna get more into it. Sometimes when you really like something, right, and you fuck up or it's hard, the fact that you still like it is what's going to keep you motivated. Because if you
Yeah.
fuck up and you stop, then you probably didn't really like it. So I guess for you, were you like, okay, I got to figure this out, and like all these failures is what's going to get me better, So what did you actually change to kind of be like, yeah, no more bombs?
Well, I definitely wasn't that mature to be like, oh yeah, failure is good and it's empowering and it makes me. I was definitely, I cried, I screamed, I threw tantrums. Like I didn't take it
Yeah, I
well,
was trying
and
to
I
make you look
still.
good. Yeah.
It's not happening.
Yeah.
It's
Okay.
still, and like failure is still really hard for me to take, but I've come to the point where I know what I need to get through it. Like I mentioned before, I'll complain about it, I'll whine about it for a bit, but then the next day I get up and try it again. But I know
And
I'm
when
a
you were
whiner,
also,
so I gotta whine about
yeah,
it. I know that about me.
yeah, at least you know yourself.
Yeah.
And when you were kind of getting into this path, like let me get better at this. Did you?
Hmm.
I know you said you weren't thinking too matured stuff, but did you at least have an idea of what you wanted to do with comedy? Was it kind of like, oh, I want to be the sold out everywhere theaters, or what was kind of your intention with it?
I don't think I ever had the intention of selling out theaters and becoming a touring stand-up comedian, because I was more interested in the opportunities that stand-up brought me. For example, working for a TV show is still like my ultimate goal. And stand-up helps me develop a sense of humor. It helps me get a network of other funny comedians and funny friends, and, you know, just like being in that space where I get to meet people who are kind of going towards the same things as me. But that being said, I love stand-up. I just don't know if I would ever want to do more than like a 45-minute set. Maybe in the future, but I mean, I love shows and I love performing, but it's not like my main thing.
Yeah, and I heard you say that before on another podcast, and the first thing I thought about is that, you know, your interest, or it seems like your main interest is TV, maybe film, maybe movies.
Yeah.
So I was kind of curious, did you ever think about, like, once you started the whole comedy thing, did you ever think about, like, actually, let me just go full into the whole film industry education? Did you ever think about just straight up stopping comedy and just pivoting wholeheartedly into, I know you're obviously in school for film right now, but
Yeah.
earlier on, were you kind of like, oh, let me just go all in on this writing and
Early
film
on, when I started stand-up, I was, you know, wanting to go all in on stand-up, but I think it doesn't help to be a one-trick pony in the industry these days. Like, you should be able to do multiple things, whether it's acting or writing or stand-up or social media, and like all the numerous things that I do. People like to see like a more well-developed person, as opposed to this person has amazing stand-up, but nothing else.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, no, that's key. Having that portfolio of your different skills.
yeah.
And I noticed that when you released Paranormal Disruption, I was kind of curious, you know, what all went into that, because I'm one person that whenever I see somebody create something, I'm always curious on the how, because you know, obviously you always see the final product, but I'm like, yo, how did she, you know, meet this person? Who was her sound person? Who edited her videos? How did they shoot this scene? So kind of like leading up to Paranormal Disruption, your comedy web series that anybody can find on YouTube. What was your inspiration and motivation behind that?
Well, I wanted a web series, and I had been working in startups in Austin for quite some time to earn money, and I just, you know, found the culture really funny, so I wanted to make fun of it a bit. But I had no idea like anything about writing scripts. I didn't know what character development was or plots or anything. I just like that whole web series is just vibes for me. You know, there's no plot, just vibes. Hashtag. But
yeah,
it was so much fun to make. It was my first time making something and like acting in it too. So I was, you know, kind of like head of everything, HBIC. So I started that with some money that I had saved up from like my corporate day jobs. And the Austin comedy community is connected to like every single other artistic community in Austin, which is really cool. So I knew a lot of filmmakers through that. And that's how I started it.
Dang, so you made all that with no prior experience in anything
Nope.
screenwriting or script
Nope.
writing. That's crazy.
Yeah.
Because it was professional. I looked at it like, okay, this is really dope. I was like, I like how she just like put an idea, and that's really what I'm all about. I just love when somebody just is like, man, fuck it, let me actually do it. And once you like got that experience, did it like really confirm for you, oh, this is it? And what kind of led you to I guess apply to be in, you know, film school in London? Like what from that experience led you to where you are right now?
Well, I wanted to learn how to write, and I really enjoyed making that series, but I didn't know much about screenwriting at all. And, you know, I realized that in order to get the jobs that I want, which is in TV writing, an ultimate goal would to be to write in something that I can star in as well. So, like, write my own character. I realized that I have to know how to do this. And then I chose London because, you know, I got into a school there, and I was like, when am I going to get the opportunity to come here again? And also my parents live in Germany, so I was so far away from them for so long that I was like, let's be closer to them for a while.
No, it's beautiful. And you mentioned your parents. I think I noticed this when I was watching the credits to Paranormal.
Mm-hmm.
Did your parents executive produce that for you? Or
Yeah, which
assist you with that?
basically just means they contributed money to it.
I see. Okay. I
Yeah,
was like,
yeah.
okay. I see because
No,
I
they
saw your
weren't on
last
like
name and I'm
set or
like,
anything.
okay.
Yeah.
I was like, damn. I see your mom in this chair, like
I
action.
know.
And I was gonna ask, and I wanted to know what has been their response to you saying, "Hey, by the way, I want to be a comedian. I want to do film." Like, how did they react to that?
At first, they were a bit, apprehensive about it. They tolerated it. They never supported it for the first few years, just because they have also never been into this industry before. They had no idea what to expect of it. They know it's unstable. So they were like, you have a finance degree, like, focus on that, and you can do this other stuff in your spare time. But then I was like, no, like, I'm really committed to this. And they saw that I was really committed to this. So by the time I got to grad school, they were like, okay, like, we see you put the work in and we see results come
Yeah.
out of it. And most recently, I
Yeah.
actually got a job with a director that they know and they've seen his films. So that's the thing that, like, really legitimized it for them. Now they're, crystal clear with it. Now they're very supportive. They want to read my scripts. And yeah, so that, like, really,
That's,
they were like, okay, I get it now.
yeah, I think parents, especially when it comes to like creative type content, it's a very creative stuff isn't new, right? But I think in these days, the fact that a lot of us are wanting to do it young and like basically right out of college, I think it's kind of
Yeah.
scary to some parents.
Yeah.
But you do got to put in that work to in a way convince them, because like even if they say no, you are still going to always have that want. So to stop it is almost a disservice to yourself. And I wanted to go back to, you mentioned the Austin comedy community, and there was
Well,
one, I can't remember the name of the show. What was that?
actually, I just want to touch on what you said about people in the creative industry starting young. I would almost,
Yeah.
if I could go back and do something again, I would start now. Because when you're young, you don't really know yourself that well. And there's I
Yeah.
would say, much longer learning process to where you're like in your late 20s/early 30s. I really admire the people who started comedy at that age, because their jokes, like, even if they weren't refined because they were just starting, they just had a point of view. They had a sense of humor. They knew what they were about. They didn't let, like, failure get to them as hard as they would have when they were younger. And I always noticed that.
Okay. So you're saying that if you were younger, you would have started earlier.
Yeah, I
is
would
what you're
have.
saying.
No. If I was younger,
Oh, okay. Okay.
I would have started
Yes.
later and, like, maybe spent the first half of my 20s making money.
Oh, okay. I was
Yeah.
like, okay, so I see. No, let's go in on that. Because I think that's a
Yeah.
very interesting perspective. And do you think the reason for that is because of some of the maybe financial hardship you went through at that early age?
No. The reason for that is more so of knowing what my voice is, because I think the first few years of comedy, I really struggled with that, and I really just, kind of went down rabbit holes of anxiety and depression just because I, let myself get validation from external sources, like bombing at a show, or like doing well at a show, and this person likes me, that person doesn't like me, that person's going to book me, that person never wants to see my face again, like that kind of stuff. And I think a lot of that worry about what other people think of you disappears when you get older. So yeah, that was more why.
Yeah. It's funny because I relate slash pushback, and I want to say why I relate. I relate because, about a month or two ago, and I've even talked to Aparna about this, I was very close to just straight up leaving my job for something else, not just like quitting, but like I really wanted to just change because I felt so trapped and just not motivated to do anything. Like there were some days, because I work remote, I work in IT, and like we might even have a meeting at, like, let's say 8 a.m., right? I wake up, I will not even want to get up and go to my computer because I was
Mm-hmm.
just like, yo, I don't want to deal with this today. And sometimes I would have, I had the app that we met on, Microsoft Teams on my phone, and I would
Mm-hmm.
just open the app and take a meeting. I'm literally in bed. Like that's how bad I've just felt about getting up. So I wanted to straight up just leave my job, right? And then for me, I had to get to this point of like, man, like I feel like I'm just kind of complaining too much and I'm not making any change. And I initially thought that change was like, let me just quit my job and do this whole thing full time. And then I had to put it into perspective of what I wanted to do. I'm like, okay, what if I figure out what is the not bare minimum, but like enough to do my job well. But how am I structuring my day that I actually have time for these other things? Like, if you were to ask me, what am I doing tomorrow? And I didn't have a schedule, that's on me. Like, I hadn't prioritized myself enough to
Ooh.
make sure that each day was efficient. You get what I'm saying?
Ooh,
So I had to
yeah.
really evaluate because I thought the answer was like, oh, let me quit my job and I'll be better. But if I can't even figure out what I'm doing on Friday and it's Thursday, then I am already struggling, right?
Yeah.
So that's why I relate because I think it is good to still have that financial backing so that you have that freedom. And
Mm-hmm.
the reason I say I push back a little bit is because sometimes you never know when the right time is to start. Right. So it's kind of like if somebody heard that advice and they were like, oh, yeah, let me wait till I'm 28 and then I'll
Mm-hmm.
go full comedy.
True.
You might miss that time from 23 to 28 to really grow in your skill. So that's why I'm like, it's a weird answer. You know what I'm saying? Like you never really know.
Yeah.
So
That's true. I mean,
that's
if
my two
if
cents.
you're
Yeah.
19 and you feel like you know yourself and you know your voice, then by all means, get into whatever you want to get into.
Yeah.
But I know I'm speaking from personal experience. For me, it took a bit longer.
Yeah.
And another thing I want to
Exactly.
say is I feel like me in particular, and maybe some immigrant kids as well, we kind of tend to age backwards. Like we're really responsible in our youth and our teens when we're with our parents, but then like once we have the freedom that allows us to explore our individuality more, I think we tend to like feel that youthful energy of like, ooh, I can do everything.
Oh my God, that hits. I
Yeah.
really relate to that because I was just talking to somebody about how kind of growing up, my parents are very just like with Nigerian household, probably similar to you, like very like, hey, engineer, doctor, lawyer,
Yeah.
stuff like that. And so my parents always were like, yeah, don't go out with your friends, come home,
Yeah.
make sure you're reading and doing all your work. And I got awesome grades. Like, I
Hmm.
did it. I killed it. But when I got to college, yo,
Yeah.
and I had like freedom and I'm like, yo, we
Hmm.
outside. Like, yo, I was turning
Yeah.
up a little bit too
Going
much.
crazy.
But
Yeah.
yo, wilding out. And I learned a lot about myself then because I'm like, oh shit, I need structure.
Yeah.
I need structure because I will fuck shit up. So I never
Yeah.
heard it described like that. We age backwards, but
Yeah.
I really like that definition. And for you, how did that kind of come out? Was it kind of like college for you? Or was it like when you were started working? When did you like, oh shit, like I'm a child still?
Um, I don't think it ever stopped since college, to be honest. And I don't mean that in a bad way, but I mean
Yeah.
that I think like when realize that you're doing something that you love and you're good at and you're working towards something that you actually enjoy working towards and you know who you are and you're not like really pressed about the opinions of others, I think that you can tend to, it's like the childishness that like running down the street screaming or just being silly and goofy and all that kind of stuff
Yeah.
that comes around with things that we probably haven't done since we were 5.
And I didn't ask in terms of saying like, oh, it ended at some point, but I'm glad that you said it never ended because I think we all need to keep
Yeah.
that inner child
Yeah.
in us because that's probably our truest self. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? Like
Mhm.
my parents hated the fact that I wanted to do graphic design when I was younger, but
Yeah.
now I'm here helping to graphic design my own podcast. Like I needed these skills to do what I'm
Well,
doing now.
yeah.
So
Mhm.
it never goes away. And I do want to address some of the stuff that you said in that period of trying to figure out validation. You mentioned, sad, depression, and it reminds me of this set that you did, this bit. And I'm not gonna fuck it up by trying to say it word for word, but generally the joke was you were kind of walking out late, and then you called the suicide hotline, And the joke was
Oh,
that,
that's a
while you're
deep
calling that,
cut.
you
Yeah.
see, yeah, that's a deep cut. And you were, and while you're doing that, you're looking around, like, because obviously the setting is, you're a woman walking around, it's late at night, and you're on the phone with the person. You're like, hold on, somebody's following me. I'm not trying to get murdered. And that was so funny to me because I'm like, it's very dark humor, but it was funny
Yeah.
to me because in that moment you see like, oh shit, like I want to laugh, but I also realized like, oh fuck, like she was going through some shit. And you mentioned that was based on a true story. So,
Yeah.
however comfortable you are sharing that situation, I would just love to know more about that time in your life and just how you felt.
Yeah, so it's funny that you said the reason I said it was a deep cut is because I've only done that joke once for a mental health podcast. So I'm like
Yeah.
surprised that you found it. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I mean, I think that I just like really didn't have an internal sense of like validation, and I think that I'm still kind of working towards that. In a sense, it's definitely gotten way better than it was, but I think like when you're seeking validation, especially in comedy when there's so much failure, if you're wanting to be assured that you're good by having a good set, it's just not going to happen because you have more bad sets than you have good sets, especially when you're starting out in comedy. And I would just be broken by that because, I'm kind of a perfectionist too. So even if, I got a decent amount of laughs, but like my last joke didn't hit, I would get really down on myself and be like, oh, I'm not good at this. Other people are so much better. The comparison, that was also another thing that really fucks with you. So yeah, I did struggle
Mm-hmm.
with mental health, anxiety, depression. It's funny that you mentioned the suicide hotline because every time I've called them, something funny has happened. Like one time, the one that you mentioned, and then the other time I was
Yeah.
on the phone with them and hit the aux cord, and it unplugs out of my car, and Maroon 5 is blasting in my car, like from the radio. And I was just like, I couldn't hear. And I'm just like, hey, hang on. And I start to panic. And that moment was so silly that I couldn't help but laugh. And the person on the other line is just like, is everything okay back there? And I'm like, yeah, I think I'm better now. Hang up.
Yeah, and I know it's. I think what's great about those jokes was that it was real. Like
Yeah.
it was real shit, but
Mm-hmm.
you were able to see the comedy in it, and that's
Yeah.
why I'm not a comedy head, but I love when comedians can make us think deeper than the joke.
Yeah.
Because to me, I'm like, yo, she's going through some real shit, but the
Uh-huh.
fact that she's able to word it in a way that we feel comfortable laughing at her pain in a
Mm-hmm.
way is like it's talent.
Yeah.
So
Oh,
I
thank you.
do really appreciate you sharing that. And I wanted to also ask, you said that you gotten better, but comedy, like your your whole job is literally validation via laughter.
Mm-hmm.
So how do
Yeah.
you even how have you personally worked on not being too reliant on that, but still having the fortitude to come back and tell jokes every week, or how often you do it?
Well, I wish I could say there was some secret formula, but there's not. I also wish I could say I worked
Mm,
on it in therapy and got rid of that external validation need, but I still have it. So I think something that helped for
mm,
me was during the pandemic, I got really into social media and really into other avenues of doing my comedy, like TikTok. And TikTok is great because you can be yourself. Like, that platform is begging for you to be yourself because it's like people will there you'll find your audience no matter what on that platform. So, you can be like a true crime person or like talk about fashion or talk in like a really high pitched voice and that's your only shtick. Like there's this girl that I follow who has 2 million followers just from doing seagull noises that are really spot on. So I felt like I got a lot of validation from that platform because like I would be doing jokes on there and people were liking it and sharing my stuff and it was going viral. And that kind of gave me the courage to be like, okay, I can, even if my stand up isn't the best every single night, I still have people that think I'm funny. Like somewhere around the world, someone thinks I'm funny and laughed at a video I put out.
mm-hmm.
So I think that's
Yeah.
another reason why having different avenues like screenwriting, acting, podcasting, that really helps out too because you're not relying on just one thing for your happiness.
And that's a good point because I was actually gonna ask you about TikTok because I know you be doing numbers on there, so shout out to you. But I also wondered, obviously, before you said that, I was wondering if it was an intentional like strategic funnel. Like I was like, oh, okay, did she get into TikTok to be like, hey, like I'm a comedian also. So I was wondering, like, were you thinking about the impact that TikTok could have on your comedy as well?
Yeah, I was initially, but then I just like got roped into how fun it is to use. But it does. Initially, I was like, okay, I'll meet people on here and then maybe I'll get them to come out to my shows and stuff. But then because of the pandemic, I became way more of an online comedian and an online voice. So then I just kind of
Mm.
started, being the platform, so to speak.
What was like one of your first notable TikToks or reels or whatever that a lot of people gravitated to or related to?
Um, oh, I did a day in the life of a millennial video, but it was like really depressing, and it like I said it in a
Yeah.
peppy way, but I was basically making fun of the day in the life videos that people be like, I wake up and I get coffee and I do this, blah blah blah. So yeah, I was like day in the life of the millennial. Every morning I'm waking up from like a nightmare from the recession. And or about the times of my or being in a recession, or like growing up in a recession, whatever it was, and
Yeah.
then just being like, and then at the end of the day, I set my clothes on fire because a teenager made fun of them online, and just pretending to be like, yeah, I'm a millennial. This is
Yeah.
what I do. So that one went
Got
really
you.
viral, and that was when I was like, okay, this is fun.
You're in your bag. Yeah,
Yeah,
I think
yeah,
what's great about TikTok, I'm trying to get a little bit more into it now and just like put stuff without thinking too much. Is I love that there's so many different niches. Like people
exactly.
always say
Yeah,
something talk, where there's like comedian
sure.
talk or
Yeah,
podcast talk or frog talk. Like it's really dope
literally.
that there's people are able to find like communities.
Hmm.
But another thing that I found interesting about your TikTok is your bio is the world's 10th best Indian lesbian comedy screenwriter. So my first question is like, I don't. Who are the first nine? And like,
Exactly. You can't name
what were
any.
you thinking about? Yeah, I was gonna ask like, what were you thinking about when you made that your bio? You're like, okay, this. Like, at what point were you like, this is what defines me?
I mean, I change my bio like every 2 weeks because I think of
Oh,
another
okay.
idea. So there's not a lot of thought that
Okay.
goes into it.
Got you. Yeah, I was like, okay, this might be a deep question, but
Yeah.
no, you do it
Nope.
every 2 weeks. No, but no, I love the openness of that. And one thing that also stood out to me is I was curious too because I listened to a podcast recently. This other podcaster I listened to, and he brought a comedian on who is he's gay, right? But a lot of the questions he was asking him kind of about the gay community and him growing up. And one of the questions that stood out to me was he asked him, do you feel that every time you go up to perform, you have to acknowledge that you're gay? And that was interesting to me because you would think that no, right? Because obviously if you have a audience, then they're coming out for you. But he made a good point. Well, usually, when I'm doing my own tour, not really. But when I have to do, let's say, a club or just kind of like a walk-in, I kind of have to acknowledge it. And I'm kind of curious, did you feel that there was a point in your comedy that you have to do that too?
See, I don't because I don't look like a typical gay woman. But
Mm.
women who do look typically gay, they definitely feel more
Mm-hmm.
pressure to acknowledge. And this goes with non-binary people as well. I feel like they have to say if they don't look like the traditional male female binary, or I'm sure like with gay
Mm.
men, if their voices sound gayer, then they're gonna have to say
Yeah.
something. And I feel like that's just,
Mm-hmm.
kind of that's just how it works, especially in comedy. Like people are
Yeah.
waiting for that. Um, I do enjoy talking about it because it's fun for me. So usually in all my sets, I talk about the fact that I'm gay, but I don't have to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was curious about that because I don't know, I just never thought about that because I think a lot of the one thing that he said is like, oh, I usually don't have to talk about it because I have gay voice, right? And he was saying that like
Yeah.
with my voice and intonation, you can usually tell, but it
Yeah.
was also a part of his shtick. So it's not like he's performing or utilizing his sexuality as a joke. He was just being who he was. So
Yeah.
that just I don't know. I just never thought about it. So I was kind of curious. And one thing I wanted to ask you regarding just comedy in general is now that you're in London, how has the adjustment been for comedy? Because I'm sure the audience is slightly different. Have you had to adjust your material or like figure out how Londoners laugh or any stuff like that?
Well, to be honest, I haven't really had the chance to because of COVID. So once I moved here,
Oh,
I
when'd
got
you
to
move over
do
there?
October 2019. And that's when I
Oof,
started school
I see.
too. So I wasn't doing very much stand up when I first moved there. I did maybe 3 or 4 shows, but not more than that. And then COVID happened. And then ever since things started opening up, I just haven't had the chance to do it yet. But,
Got you. Yeah.
I can tell you from the shows that I did that, I don't think I ever changed my jokes. I think that it was still an audience thing. Some people got it, some people didn't, but I
Yeah.
don't have too many points to go off of.
And
Hmm.
you've previously said before, you mentioned how you don't like, let's say you fuck up and you bomb a show or you didn't do that great. You don't
Hmm.
like blaming your audience for your failure. And I think that's a
Yeah.
really good perspective because sometimes, even me, sometimes, I'll have an episode or I'll listen back to an episode like, damn, like I should have said this or I didn't get this many downloads. Like, oh, people just ain't fucking with it. But that's a horrible way to look at it because at the end of the day, you're the person that's creating the content. You have to serve the audience. So you always have to be like, how can I do better? So like from all of your bombs and just figuring shit out, I guess you said you haven't really figured out the best way to change it, but are you starting to figure out what people really like and what your niche slash I guess your best skills are?
Um, yes, I am starting to figure out my niche, but I think it's also like kind of a double-edged sword because if you're someone who can play to every crowd, that's amazing and that's great. But I think that some people, the people who play to every crowd, they're still very, they have a formula, they have a style, even if they're not catering to everyone in the crowd. Okay, that's the difference. Playing
Mm-hmm.
to the crowd versus catering. I feel like if you're pandering and you're trying to make jokes just because a specific subset of people are there, I think the audience can sniff that out really
Mm,
quickly. But I think, the
yeah,
successful comedians of today, they're very good at being themselves, whatever that is to them, and then also making any crowd laugh.
got you.
It's a very
Yeah, I
delicate
agree. I think
balance. Yeah,
yeah, it's delicate,
kind of
and
a catch
I
twenty
relate to that from a
two.
podcasting. Yeah, and I relate to that from a podcasting perspective because I think when I first started, I was like, "Oh, my podcast is for everybody. Like, if you listen to
Yeah,
this, like, it's for you, And then
yeah,
I met with somebody he's really big into like podcast growth and stuff. He was like, "Yo, it might not make sense, but you have to figure out one specific person."
true.
And when he said that to me, I was like, "Why?" He was like,
Yeah.
"Well, think about it like this: once you have that niche, that one person, they're going to recommend it and share it with somebody like
Mm-hmm.
them." And that in
True.
itself is like compound
Yeah.
interest. You know what I'm saying? So you actually start to
Interesting.
build an
Yeah.
audience from that one
From
person.
that one
And I
person.
was like, God damn it. You know what I'm saying? From that one person, I was like, okay. And it just kind of changed my whole way of like curating the content or choosing guests. You know what I'm saying? So I think it's interesting that you mentioned it from a comedic point of view because I think it's very similar, but
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it's I think we just kind of learn as we go. And
Yeah.
are you in this point now? Because we've been talking a lot about your comedy, but I'm kind of curious about what's next for you. Obviously, like you pop in on TikTok a little bit, you doing your thing on Twitter or whatever. Have you kind of figured out like, okay, how can I one, kind of generate an income stream from this, and then two, how can I now pivot into my dream of getting into TV shows?
Well, I mean, right now I'm working on a portfolio of scripts. So ideally, like once I have something that I'm really, really proud of and something that shows like all of my writing talents, I can start submitting that to a manager or an agent. And once, you know, I lock someone down, however long that process could take, like months or years, who knows? Not years, hopefully not years, year.
Hopefully, yeah.
Year. That's my goal.
Yeah.
So once I have
Yeah.
that, it's a lot easier to break into the industry and to find writing jobs. I also want to act more because I really like performing and I really want to play different characters. You know, I've played myself enough.
Yeah. You did a good job, though. You did a good job.
Yeah.
You did a good job. No, okay, that's good to know, and I do wish you the best of luck because I really love people uh, that just make their shit happen. You know, so
Yeah.
I think obviously if you keep trying, you're gonna figure it out eventually. But aside from that, like what would you say are your hobbies, interests outside of your creative? Because I feel like some of the stuff that you do that's not work is actually what inspires your content. So like, you know, somebody asks you, let's say we're on a first date, you know, and I'm like, oh my God, like, what do you like to do for fun? How would you answer that?
My hobbies are literally socializing. Like I love hanging out with friends and I love planning events and I love like planning the hang and like what are we gonna do and all that stuff. Like literally that is my hobby. That's what I love to do outside of work. And
I see.
yeah, other than that, I'm like I had just started playing the guitar, but I broke my thumb, so had to put that on pause. But yeah, I
Uh,
mean, if I wasn't doing this, I would probably either want to be like a little coffee shop musician, which I honestly still can do, or
yeah.
an event planner.
Are you that person? Like, I know you guys went to Tulum recently for like the bachelorette party, but like,
Hmm.
are you that person when you're planning an event? You're like, okay, 8
Well,
a.m. we're doing this, 9 a.m. we're doing this.
see, Aparna's a better event planner than I am. Like she is kind of the alpha of the group in terms of event planning.
I can see
And
that.
yeah, and
I
I
can see
think that
that.
when someone is more motivated to plan than me, then I'm just like, all right, I'm just gonna kick back. But when that person doesn't exist, it's me.
That's dope.
Yeah.
And we've kind of talked a lot about just, you know, a wide array of things that have kind of influenced your life. But I'm curious, do you have maybe any person, or I guess if it's not person, maybe literature or whatever, that something that you kind of go back to that influences you or motivates you or inspires you?
I don't think so. I think that it
No.
changes a lot. Like I'll really get into someone, whether it's a comedian or a filmmaker or a TikToker even, and just
Hmm.
watching their stuff will spark something in me. And usually the people
Yeah.
that do tend to do that are people who are just like they make their craft look so easy. Like I think that if you go to a show or if you watch a movie and you think, "Oh, I can do that," that means they did a good job because it's, you know, it's in a sense it's accessible to everyone, but it also like
Mm.
ignited something in you.
You've answered a lot of the questions I asked, kind of like how I would answer it, because I was thinking about like how I would answer that question.
Yeah.
And for me, I don't think there's just one person. Like obviously,
Yeah.
there's people that I consider really dope, and I want to be like. But I've realized sometimes, like for example, I'm trying to be a better video editor,
Mhm.
right? And on YouTube, because of the algorithm, it'll always just kind of like pop up tutorials.
Yeah.
And like I start watching somebody, and I'm like, oh damn, like I like how they explain this to me. Let me go watch another video. So I think I've realized that it's not this one person or one motivator. It's whatever
Mhm.
that you want to learn, and whoever does it
Whoever's
best for
offering
you,
that.
that's
Mhm.
kind of who you
Yeah.
gravitate. Exactly, that's who you kind of gravitate to. So,
Mhm.
I definitely relate to your answer. And you know, for anybody listening, I want to know if you had to say kind of one thing. Let's say nobody really wanted to watch this whole interview, right? They just kind of like said "F it," right? But you had to give one piece of advice to somebody on how to best create the life that they want to live, what would your words of advice be?
My favorite one is never be the one that says no to yourself. Let other people say no to you. So, like, if you want to create something, don't be the one that steps in your own way. You know, do it. And then you'd be surprised how many people are okay with it and they like it. And if they're not, they're not. And I kind of take that advice in screenwriting a lot because I tend to self-edit my own thoughts a lot. So like I won't even write something down if it doesn't pass through my perfection filter. But that's not helping anybody. So yeah. Let others say no to you. Don't say no to yourself.
Ooh, I like that one.
Mm-hmm.
That's I've never heard that one. I really like that one. Oh, that was really good.
Yeah.
It just made me think about when you said self-edit. One thing I've been doing now is whenever I'm getting ready to interview somebody, right? I'll start kind of like, looking stuff about them up. But as like, for example, for you, right? As you were talking on all these podcasts, like they're obviously asking you maybe not similar questions, but kind of like similar life, like what about you questions. But what I've gotten better at doing now is I'll have my phone with me, and you might say something, or the host might say something, and I just write that down. I'm like, oh, that was interesting, right? And then kind of like the day before the interview, I'll look back at all the stuff that I wrote, and I'll kind of like I don't know, not organized, but I'll go through and be like, oh, she said this. That kind of like relates to when she said this about that. And I found that that's a very more productive than I don't think I should ask her that. They ask her that, or I shouldn't, because I think it's like you learn so much from people that you can kind of take it to another level in terms of like not the basic questions. So, that words of advice is that was deep. I really like that. So, I do want to thank you, once again for coming on. I know it's what time is it over there again?
It's only 8 in the evening.
Okay, so it's not too bad, but
it's not that bad.
Yeah, I know. I didn't want to keep you up too late, but no, I really appreciate you for coming on and being, strong enough to share your story and just be real with us. And I also want to just assure you that I think you're killing it. You're doing it, and I'm really glad that you're able to overcome any of the whatever stuff that you may be going through and understand that it's bigger things for you. So I'm really glad that you were willing to share that, because it's a sensitive thing, but I think with comedians, they do a good job at talking about sensitive things. So I hope to expect a lot more funny deep cuts from you in the future. And we'll keep in touch. But to anybody listening, always remember to stay creative. Thank you guys for tuning in to that creative conversation. I hope it was able to inspire you. And if you'd like to continue getting inspired, there's actually 3 main ways you guys can do that. 1, you guys actually watch all the YouTube videos. That's the full-length episodes and also clips, just to get a little preview about what each episode might be about. 2, you guys can actually listen on all podcasting platforms, which is Apple Podcasts and Spotify, or wherever you happen to listen to podcasts. Please feel free to leave a rating or review, just to help me out and also get the word of mouth out there. 3, you guys can actually subscribe to the Paul and Pals newsletter, which is basically a written summary of each episode in addition to my takeaway, so that I kind of give what the episode made me think about, what I got from it. Link in the description and show notes. But without further ado, always remember to stay creative.